Hello?
Hey, Rob. Hey, this is George.
Hi, George.
How are you? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I just can't hear myself.
Oh, okay.
I'll just use one headphone or one earphone earphone, and the rest is.
Yeah. Hey,
all right, that's better.
You sound good here.
Okay.
But yeah, so I think it's really cool to get to talk to you. You know, I've been reading your posts and things online for a couple of years now. I think maybe 2 years, probably. I think I first ran. I've trying to remember the first time I remember reading your posts and things that you said, and I recall that my first experience reading your stuff. Reading your stuff and looking at your pictures was when you were going out into like more urban areas, like places where homeless people were, and small parks, and there was and you had all these pictures and evidence. So maybe you could just tell me about how you got into it, and that's just my first recollection of hearing and seeing what you were up to.
Okay. That's a good place to start. I'm medically retired. I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but I spent over a year confined to the couch. And, during that time, I was pretty bored, and so I started watching YouTube videos, and that was like fall 2016, I would say. Yeah. Is when all that happened. And I started watching Mark, Colorado Bigfoot, and back then Rio was really active, and there were a lot of different people who were doing videos. Timber Giant and Mike Patterson was still active back then, more than he is now. And there were just a lot of different people doing videos. And, to me, it was just interesting at that time. It was a new subject, and I thought, hey, why not? I'm going to look into this. And like I said, I was confined to the couch anyway, so, what am I supposed to do? The following spring of 2017, we went down to Reno, Nevada. My stepdaughter was participating in the jazz festival down there at the university, and we got away after the festival was over. We stayed a couple of extra days, and we drove over to Tahoe, and we were driving along the north shore of Tahoe, through Incline Village, I think it's called. And I just got this I'm not kidding. We were just driving. It's a very forested town. It's on the flanks of the mountain, basically. And I just got this really strange feeling, and I looked over to the side, and I saw all this chaos on the side of the road, and I was like, that's weird. So I turned around and drove back by, and I couldn't really see much because we were up high, and we had just gone over a bridge over a creek, and I couldn't really see much because the brush on the side of the road and everything kind of hid it. So I went down the road a little ways, turned around again, and this time when I came back, I parked. and we got out of the car, and my wife and I, and we went in. And, at that time, I figured she would think I was out of my gourd. If I found something, she wouldn't believe it, So the way I see that, and we spent 4 hours in there taking pictures, both of us. She was convinced right away. She saw things that could not have happened normally. And there was too many instances of it. She saw the consistency. So, she was putting the patterns together right away. And so thank God for that, because, it's hard to have a spouse, that doesn't go along with it. Mm-hmm. I've been there.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, and she's great. I mean, she finds things I'll never find. She has her own way of looking at it, and a different set of eyes and a different perspective on the matter, and it's really cool. So that was really cool. But I got to tell you, and it was like a boot camp. There was about an acre and a half on each side of the road. The creek ran through it, and I'm just not gonna. I'm not gonna go into too much detail on that, but there was a lot there. It was like Sasquatch boot camp. Mm-hmm. If you needed to be exposed to everything they did, it was there. It was all there. So there was absolutely no ambiguity about it whatsoever. It was too apparent.
Yeah, I remember your pictures.
Yeah, that was Tahoe, and I haven't been back to that spot, but we did go to Tahoe one more time, and we were on the east side of the lake, and we went up for a hike in the mountains there, and we found more there. So in a big wooded park. So that was interesting. It was a confirmation. But the way I see that first trip at Tahoe, the very first one, it was almost like they were calling me in. I was just driving by. I would have just driven right by this spot. We were driving around the lake. We were sightseeing. And so it kind of wasn't even, I mean, it was on my mind because it was wooded there, but that's about all it was. It was on my mind. And that, there was no intention to stop or do anything. So it was kind of like, and I'm not going to read anything into that. That's just how I see it. I see it as they invited me into their world. That's it. And I didn't seek it out. It sort of found me.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know why or anything like that. I don't speculate. I just go with it. Mm-hmm. So then when I got back, I thought, I want to go up in the mountains, because I figured you had to go to the mountains for this. So I had to wait for the roads to open up, because here, I mean, I don't know what your mountains are like there, but we get a lot of snow and you have to wait for everything to open up. Mm-hmm. So I waited and waited and waited way too long. And I went up in the mountains in June and got into it really thick. And that was, it was a family trip. I had my daughter, my stepdaughter, my wife. We were all up there with cameras, and we spent the afternoon there, and it was actually a lot of fun. And we had some on our way as we went back to the car to leave, 2 series of rapid fire wood knocks, like 8 in each set. And there were 2 of them, and we got the sound on a recording. My wife was doing video recording, and we got the sound of both of those on. So I knew they were in the mountains around here, and that was all I knew at that point. And I soon discovered, just by coincidence, that they were in the parks here. Just walking through a park, and I was like, well, wait a minute. I saw some things. And, it's pretty forested here. If there weren't homes here, this would just be solid fir, cedar, and hemlock trees and occasional redwoods. And, it's dense here. When you get in the woods, it's dense. And so, it's like everywhere there's a park, there's forests, because a lot of these places are like, watersheds, stuff like that. A lot of water coming down from the mountains into the Puget Sound, and they just protect the areas where the water runs through. And so they get all of these naturally forested parks in this area, just to have a natural watershed.
Mm-hmm.
And I live down by the Puget Sound, so I have those things all around me here. If I go 5 miles north of my place and 5 miles south, I bet there's 15 or 20 of them, easily. So there's a lot of it here. And so I started hitting all the parks, and I went to parks in the city and stuff like that. And I started discovering, what I started discovering was they were just prolific in areas where people were. And my first Facebook page was called Urban Squatch.
Yeah.
So I kind of started with that, but Facebook did a purge, and they made everybody who didn't have a personal name on their account either vouch for the account and show proof of ID and all that stuff, or lose the account. So that's why it's got my name on it now. But yeah, I found homeless people using apparent Sasquatch constructed areas for living in. I mean, why not? They're nice. They're nice areas. They're protected and everything, and they would hang their stuff to dry on the wood structures and all of that stuff. I have pictures of all of that. It's fascinating, and yeah, we have a pretty dense population here. I'm only, 15 miles or so north of Seattle, of downtown Seattle. So it's pretty densely populated here. It's just solid people all along the Sound, north and south, in this area anyway. So yeah, it's pretty densely populated, and we share it. The lowlands of the Puget Sound are, between the Cascade Mountains and the Puget Sound, are full of them. Everywhere that I've gone in the lowlands, I've seen signs of them. So they aren't just in the mountains, and that was just something in my head that I made up. And my initial, most of my exposure to them was stuff that I can find from my home easily, because, I'm not physically really all that capable of getting out into the mountains all the time. So I just do it around here as much as I can, and collect as much evidence. I can go to the grocery store and stop by a forest on the way home, and spend 40 minutes in there or whatever, and learn some things, and then come home and cook dinner. I can do things like that all the time. And I got time because I'm not working, so it's like that. So that's how I got started. I got started by hanging out on the couch.
Well, that's kind of how I got started. I was still working and everything, but I just started watching videos. I was mostly listening to UFOs and ghost stuff, and then one day I just started watching these videos, and I thought, wow, there's 100 of these, so these are all fake, and then I thought, there's no way these are all fake, they're all just these shaky blurry, barely visible things. And,
yeah.
So I was kind of the same way. So do you think, I think one of the differences between you and I is, you probably were looking for tree structures right away. Is that correct?
You mean like when you say tree structures, do you mean just tree part structures, like structures on the ground or structures up in the trees?
Not on the ground so much, but more, pinned arches and teepees or asterisks.
Yeah, boy, down here in the that's the other thing about it I noticed right away is it really changes significantly. Those structures change a lot when you get close to civilization. When you start getting in the parks around here, you might find a structure that'll pop up once every 2 years or something like that, and it'll be around for a while, but it'll be dismantled. And I don't know if that's by the parks people or if they take it apart, or I don't know who does it. I'm pretty sure that the more visible structures to the public, the parks people are taking them apart because they don't want they know something's going on and they don't want people getting bothered over that.
Yeah.
So I think some of that stuff gets dismantled by parks people, and I think that you have to be deaf and dumb and blind to not understand where those are coming from, especially when they pop up consistently in the same park year after year.
Right. And I think
as far as the structures go, though, they every once in a while you'll see something funky, but it won't be as elaborate as what you'll see up in the mountains. It won't be as grandiose. It won't be. And mostly what you will find in the parks that you're sawing are the little tiny paths that they make that go off to the side, and you can tell them apart from what the deer make or what the coyote make because they're just different. There's no tearing up of the ground. They're more flattened out, and the trails are pretty narrow. They're usually only about, the flattened out parts probably a foot or less wide. Most of what you see in the parks around here as far as using tree parts are glyphs on the ground, and those are prolific. Those are everywhere. But you'll especially find them at the beginning of a trail that they use. They will mark the trail. They mark all of the trails. And there are areas where they will just go crazy with the glyphs. You might get into an area under some trees that's 30 by 30 feet or something like that, that's just completely covered in glyphs all over the place. So they're really, they really do a lot of that, and the people walking around in these parks don't even notice it. They aren't looking at the ground. They're just walking through, They got their dog. They're talking to a friend who's with them, whatever, and they don't even notice them. But here I am in there with a camera, and they're watching me. So they know I'm in there. I've had interaction with them around here, so. But as far as the structures go, to really see the big stuff, you got to get into the foothills or up into the mountains here, and then they get grandiose. They get huge, and where they really get prolific with the Cascade Mountains, you got the coastal side of the mountains, and the mountains kind of stop the moisture from going to the eastern side. And once you get over the top and start heading down the eastern side, and you get into the pine forest rather than the evergreen, the cedars and and furs and all of that stuff. Once you get on the other side and you're in the pine forest, I mean, it gets crazy. It turns the structures get huge and insane and very, I mean, you get in one area and it'll just be all around you everywhere. Like the kind of stuff that you see Mark Abell get into, only maybe on a smaller scale, but kind of like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it varies here. You get in the lowlands and it's like, I put up an X once and they took it down. I put a big X in one of their wallows, out of two limbs that were probably 7 or 8 inches in diameter. And I did it in a way that they were between 2 trees so I could kind of pin them in place.
Mm-hmm.
And the next day I came and they were laying on the ground.
Mm.
And they were, they don't want people to. I think they have rules about that here. I think they're very careful about it. So, when you're in the lowlands, you don't want to give yourself away.
Yeah, and people, a lot of people ask new people, or when you do interviews and stuff, they'll ask me, what do they mean? Well, I don't know what it means, but I just think, like you were describing, as you get up further, maybe deeper and higher and less traveled, then it just means that I think it means that they're more actively there, and the smaller ones, like in the lowlands, like what you're saying, that maybe they're just passing through here and there and marking trails, but not a big elaborate things. That's kind of as far as I go. The rest of it's just me guessing, but I know a few people that have them at their house.
Yeah. I think it's really, in a lot of ways, I think it's a form of creativity for them. The stuff that I've seen kind of lends itself to that. The ones that I've seen in the parks here are strictly creative. They don't mean anything. They're just a form of expression, self-expression. That doesn't mean they're all that way. I've seen, I look everywhere I go, and I've seen them in Australia a few years ago before all the fires and everything. We were in Australia, and I saw a lot there. I was just shocked.
Mm.
And in Malaysia, you can't really go out in the jungles in Malaysia. It's dangerous. But I did everything I could, but go into the jungles, and it's there too. It's definitely there. And everywhere I've gone in the U.S., I've run into it. And it doesn't matter whether it's in the desert or, up in the mountains or whatever. I've seen them everywhere. So I used to think Dogman was on the eastern side of the U.S., over on the other side of the Rockies. And I used to think that, you have all these ideas that you form, and they all got blown out of the water. When I saw Dogman prints here in 2017, right after I first started, and it scared the hell out of me.
I think I remember that, yeah.
I mean, it was just up the road from my house. It was, on the road I live. I was walking on the road I live on, but I was in a forested area. And there was a big, huge laurel tree. And whatever it was had been, it had been raining, and the soil there is kind of a little bit of loam, but a lot of sand. And something had been kind of standing under that laurel tree and pacing or something like that. It was like it was there, and it was impatiently waiting for something. And it was walking around, and it really tore up the ground underneath that thing. And so it caught my attention when I was walking by it. I'm like, oh, something was under there. Was this like a place where a coyote killed something or something. What happened here, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing I know, I'm in there, I'm underneath, and I'm taking pictures and stuff, and there are some really good prints, and it was obviously Dogman. And it just floored me. I was like, no, that's an East Coast thing. That doesn't happen here. I was in total denial. But that's what got me. That one day is what made me turn back to looking at the ancient history to find out, because I had to know what these were and where they came from.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was it for me. That was like and I think I know. I can't say it's a fact, but I think we're close to that. I think we're not that far away from verifying what they are. And hang on.
Mm-hmm.
I lost my microphone and stuff. It fell out.
That's okay. You're fine. Yeah, a lot of
anyway, I don't know if you got any of that.
Yeah. A lot of people, I remember when I kind of first ran into the Dogman, I kind of just dismissed it, and then I came back to it later when I started listening to the encounters. There's so many encounters, and then I took it more seriously, and I was kind of shaken up a little bit too. Like, wow, these things they are all over the place. You know, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
You know, mostly North America, but there's other places too. But yeah, I mean,
they're in Europe.
Yeah.
They're definitely in Europe, especially Eastern Europe. But they're there aren't very many on the west side of Europe, but they're there.
Yeah, there's Germany. There's some I've heard in Germany. I've seen a good picture of Germany. Yeah.
Yeah. As you get closer to the coast, you're going to see less of them, but they're still there. They're still there.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you say to that?
I'm not sure. It's you just take it for what it is.
I mean, well, think about this. If what I'm understanding is right, they came out of the Middle East area, Eastern Europe, Middle East, South, not Eastern Europe, South. Let's see, that would be the Near East. That'd be like North Africa, perhaps, like the Iran-Iraq area and heading west from there.
Mm-hmm.
And some stories of possibility of origins kind of out of Western India, that area. So it makes sense that if they moved around from there into Europe, and how they got to North America is, who knows? They could have gone across the ice bridge, or they could have come over. I mean, I could get into it, but I think this is probably a time for a different time, another topic day.
Okay.
But anyway.
Well, one thing I was going to ask you is, a lot of people struggle with they're okay with, they could see Bigfoot because it kind of matches, different historical things, but they really struggle with Dogman because it doesn't really fit into, what our history that we've been taught conventionally.
Right.
And that's something that you talk a lot about, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I can talk about that. To give a little background real quick, I spent probably close to 10 years researching UFO. And it was, I didn't just, there's a lot of both in the UFO community and in the Bigfoot community, there's a lot of people that research something but never really get any answers. And if I'm going to spend the time to research something, I'm going to be getting answers. So, I did very extensive research on the activities of UFO with regard to nuclear weapons programs all over the world. And the only way I could understand that, what was going on, was to kind of study it from, are there things that repeat, and what were the circumstances they repeated under? Is there any correlation between all these events that seem similar? So I found out that I had to understand and learn the histories of these areas where these were taking place. And so I started learning the value of using history as a tool to apply to this really strange problem, to try to understand it. And as it turned out, yeah, I was totally onto something. Nobody had done it before, and I broke it open wide on my own without. There were a few I worked with on this quietly who didn't necessarily contribute to my work, but they were good sounding boards for me, and they encouraged me to continue. So, and these are top-notch people in the field, the old guard, people who really had put in the years of work. Mm-hmm. And, I was just a newbie to the subject. I didn't know anything. So, but I stumbled into this way of studying it, and it really paid off. But the more I studied it and the deeper I went with it, and the more documentation I accumulated and stuff, the more pressure I started getting. So there was a point where I decided not to publish because it was just not a good idea. But I have been in touch with people and over the years, and there are some key people who know my findings, and I will be writing a summary at some point, because I can't do what I wanted to do and do a thorough study and really document everything down to the last detail, and take it one decade at a time and do volumes on each decade. I can't do that, because if I do, I won't be around. Mm-hmm. I will not be around. And there's absolutely no question about that. It's a fact. So I got out of that subject. I needed time and space away from it. And I ended up in this subject. Before I made the transition, though, I did a lot of deep historical studies to try to understand the foundation for what I was finding happening with regard to the nuclear weapons programs we have. And it doesn't matter whether it was Britain, the UK, China, Russia, obviously non-declared states, nuclear states. It didn't matter. It doesn't matter. The UFO, just like Bigfoot doesn't care if it's private property. It didn't matter. They were all over it. They were in it for the long haul, and they still are, and they're still doing things. So it's ongoing. As long as we have nuclear weapons, we will have not only just activity, but interference and all kinds of other things going on. I won't get into now, but it goes really deep. There is not one aspect of that field that was not getting attention by them. So that deep history was, that deep historical study was to try to understand where that came from, where that sudden prolific attention to our nuclear weapons came from, because before World War II, nothing. And then all of a sudden, during World War II, we had all kinds of UFO activity. And when you really focused in on, when you looked at conventional warfare, it was there. But when you looked at the nuclear side of things, it got very specific, and it got very, you could tell something was going on. I mean, you knew it needed further investigation. And I just kind of stumbled into it. But I'm glad I did. But that foundational, deep history, that study that I did, it paid off big time when I got into this field, because I already had done a lot of the foundational study for trying to figure out what some of this is all about. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to approach it not just from a historical standpoint, but to see if other people were finding things that I could correlate history to. That I could use the history, but the history won't prove it alone. You have to have something to back it, something current, And I stumbled into the DNA study. And of course, this was 2017, 2018. That was old hat at that time, but still nobody in the field thought it was legitimate. Mm-hmm. So I was shocked, I mean, well, wait a minute, it happened, it's done, Mm-hmm. And then I started figuring out what the field was like. Oh, this reminds me of UFO. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is the same kind of thing. You got everything under the sun, and but you got the serious guys too, and I definitely gravitated towards them in the UFO field very quickly, and without bothering with the other stuff. And that's kind of the way I approached this one too. I went straight to the people with the knowledge and who were working hard on finding these things. And I worked at that level. I worked with them because I'm not, I'm in it to get answers, and I'm not going to waste any time. That's kind of my approach to this. And the studies I did in ancient history, some were based on what you find in the Mesopotamian texts. Some were, you still there? Mm-hmm. Okay. Because I just got some noise. Oh, yeah. Some were based on the Mesopotamian text. Some were, but a lot of it was biblical. And the reason I used biblical historical records is because they cover topics you won't find in the Mesopotamian texts. And the Mesopotamian texts are going to have to be resolved someday. We're a long ways from that right now. I'll probably never see it in my lifetime, but there's going to have to be some sort of resolution between that record and the biblical record. And I don't know how that's going to happen, but somebody's got to start working on it, because they're so far apart. Based on what I've seen, I put more merit on what I've seen in the biblical records than what I've seen in the Mesopotamian. I think some of the Mesopotamian stuff might have been like a kind of a like there was a big show going on in town, and this was the small show off to the side in a smaller theater. Even though it was supposedly the beginning of our civilization, I don't think it was the main show. And a lot of questions need to be resolved with it, but we won't talk about that here.
So what are some of the specific things that stick out to you, that for somebody that doesn't know the history like you do, that are relevant to Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Dogman, and things.
Right. Okay, so I'm just going to tell people something that I think everybody needs to hear on this. Nobody walks up to the biblical record and accepts it as a historical artifact. Nobody walks up to that thing and reads it and thinks when they're done reading it that this is a historical narrative or a historical record of any kind. It's so far removed from anything that we're used to these days that it's insane for anybody just coming out of normal life here to walk up to it and go, oh yeah, that's a historical record. It doesn't happen like that. You have to spend time in it, and you have to get used to it, and you have to understand what happened and how that related to the people back then and how it relates to us now, and that takes a long time to get to that point. I had to put it down for a year because it would just get to be too much. And then I'd pick it back up again. And like over a decade and a half, I started kind of feeling like I was getting somewhere with it. So this is not for, it's not, it's not something you just walk up to and go, oh, yeah. You really have to expose yourself to it, understand it, and it takes a while for it to soak in. It just does. I mean, some people probably walk up to it and go, oh, yeah, this, and this, like, no problem. But it wasn't that way for me at all. It took me a long time to get to the point where I felt comfortable with it. Where I could say, oh, yeah, this relates to that and that relates to that. So I had done all of that. And I had looked, when you're doing UFO studies and somebody starts talking about the Book of Enoch, you're going to get a copy of the Book of Enoch and you're going to read it. And, they've always called it the Apocrypha. They've called it non-canonical, all of these things. I didn't know at the time why they were doing that. And, you're more drawn to something that's taboo anyway. So, you're in there looking for answers. And I thought I was finding answers to stuff, but really I wasn't. I was just learning the history. Mm-hmm. And so the non-canon, I think, is kind of critical. Those books are critical. And this is important for people to understand. Once you get to the point where you accept the biblical records as a historical narrative, you need to include all the record and get as much of it as you can. And the reason for this is because there's a chapter that's barely mentioned in the Bible, that's talked about, but it's like it's a little teaser, and that's it. And the way I have asked the questions, in the church, I've asked the questions, and the answers that I've gotten have been more along the lines of, well, that's something that the average person will never understand, but the church does. We have people that understand that. That's the explanation I get. I see people trying to tackle it who really don't understand it, and they are way off base. And they can't make it work. And so I also went to the Vatican in 2006 with all these ideas in my head. My family went over to Europe, and we went and visited the Vatican and went on a tour there. And I thought, okay, I'm going to keep my eyes open for stuff, and maybe I'll see something, Well, I was shocked at all the stuff that that they just put right out in plain sight, things that would make most people ask a lot of questions, but you know, they're so in awe when they're walking through that building, they don't even notice this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a magical place when you're in there. You're not really, unless you're in it like I was at the time, you're not really looking for this stuff. So that was my confirmation that things were going on with the Vatican. And in 2006, I already had a lot of suspicions about the Vatican, and that was quite a long time ago now. So, you know, I've kept an eye on that institution for a long time, looking for signs that they were giving up something, you know, and I've actually been fortunate enough to see it happening. So the non-canon is absolutely critical stuff, and the reason it's critical is because it talks about the chapters that the institutions don't want you to be digging around in to understand. That the chapter, the very specific chapter that we are supposed to stay away from and not understand and let the church handle is the chapter when we had a huge interruption in our development, our human development. We have always had watchers since we first came onto the planet. We have had oversight. That's a given. I mean, I think that's what at least some of the UFO sightings are, is just oversight. And some of this other activity. It's watchers. It's people who are here looking out for our interests, and yes, they interfere in things. And I can prove that. But so we've always had these watchers, and at one point, this group of watchers who were here on duty, and it is a job for them. They're doing it on orders. They thought that we needed to learn some things, and so they went back. I said we would like to go down and teach them some things, and the agreement was, and this is all in the record. The agreement was, you go back there and you teach them those things, and we want you to report back. Well, they came down, they lived amongst us, and they taught us, and they taught us all of this stuff, and they didn't stop there. They kept going with it, and they taught us things that were ahead of our development that we shouldn't have known, and they never reported back. When they finally did report back, it was a mess. And they were what's the word? They were kind of incarcerated for it. But they broke out. This sounds like a movie, you know. But they broke out, and they came back to the planet, and they had an agreement. There were, according to the Bible, there's 200 of them, and they came down. They agreed amongst themselves not one would break the agreement, and they came down, and they I don't know exactly how it happened, but you know, supposedly they took human wives and all of this stuff. It's all in the chapter of the fallen angels. And when you think of angels as watchers, you know, they're when you think of fallen, they came down. Well, they fell in two ways. They came down to the planet. That's literal sense of fallen. The other sense of fallen is that they blew it, and they were not seen the same way, you know, to the hierarchy up there. So they totally blew it. So So they came down here and they created a mess. And whether it was through natural means or through genetic engineering means, a whole new race was born on this planet that had never existed before, and that was the Nephilim race. Mm-hmm. And they were soulless, extremely intelligent, and huge, of course. And though they shared DNA with us, they were soulless. And I think that's a distinction, an important distinction to make. They had no respect for life whatsoever. And it was our job at that time to help take care of them, you know. And so as they went through all the food and all the game on this planet, and, you know, really keeping them fed was huge. They're seeing humans is kind of just in the way. And they went after us, and they started killing us off, and they were even you know, they would even use us for food or whatever. And things got kind of completely out of hand here. And this went on for quite a while. And the Nephilim spread all over the planet. How they did that, I don't know. Whether they did it, you know, in watchercraft and, you know, moved around the planet in watchercraft, or whether they built their own boats and, you know, voyaged, you know, set sail over to other parts of the world. I don't know how they proliferated the planet, but they did. And their remains are everywhere on the planet, on every continent, on all parts of continents. So they can be found. I don't know about Antarctica. I can't speak for Antarctica, but pretty much everywhere else. So
when you say the remains were found,
so there was.
You mean like giant skeletons? Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And well, at the time there were. This thing fell out again.
It's all right.
At the time there was, you know, they were not immortal. They were, you know, they had a lifespan. It was a lot longer, but they had a lifespan. And this went on for a long time, and they were all over the earth, and we were really getting the short end of the stick, and we were getting killed off right and left, and things were not good. I mean, if you had a plan and you were executing a plan, and it went sideways on you, and all of a sudden it was turning into chaos, you know, you got to figure out how to put it back, how to make it right. And that's kind of what happened. But towards the end of their reign here, they started getting kind of wild anyway, but they actually did. And there are historical documents that talk about these kind of things happening in ancient history that really have no other explanation, and that is genetic engineering operations. And this angelic race that came down here, the fallen angels, were extremely intelligent. The Nephilim were extremely intelligent. You know, way, way more intelligent than we ever thought of being. And they had the knowledge. Whether they were, I don't know where it came from specifically, but they had the knowledge. And they set, you know, people will take it as they were mating with animals. And I really, from where I sit, from all the studies I've done, I really kind of doubt that is the case. And I have studied natural hybrids that have taken place here on this planet, interspecies insemination and stuff like that has happened naturally, and nothing is viable. And you just look at the fact that these hybrids have been here for, between 5 and 40,000 years, depending on when it happened. There's no, there's no way that could have happened, through some natural process. And the way it's described in the record, Mesopotamian and some of the more esoteric biblical records, and some people who had been at the Vatican translating some of the old records will have come out saying this also. There were genetic works going on the planet, and in the Book of Giants, which is from a scroll from the Dead Sea that was found in 1947, so it's a fairly recent discovery. Those scrolls were hidden away to preserve a record of that chapter that was at one time actively being destroyed by the church, and they didn't want people to know about it, so they were destroying it. So we have records in Ethiopia, we have the Dead Sea. I think there have been other discoveries and findings elsewhere that were the same thing, where people were who cared were just hiding away the record so that it could be at some point rediscovered and this Book of the Giants, it is very explicit. It talks about the creation of the animal Nephilim hybrid. So it's all there. I mean, you don't even have to imagine it. It's there.
And I think you feel that some of the more recent scientific studies that were done match up with some of the historical background that you're mentioning. Is that true?
Yeah, here we go. I want the people who are listening to this to understand something. I've only been doing this since 2017. My background, excuse me for a second. My background is aerospace engineering. And in my work, everything has to work under conditions. It's verification. And so verification for me is all part of, is just part of daily life. Verification is. I live it. And, if you're used to designing hardware that has to withstand all of this stuff, it's just par for the course that you just get used to verification. Verification is just part of the design process and making it reliable. So I'm used to verification. And so I'm looking for a way to verify this historical record, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking, well, what has been done as far as DNA? So I started poking around. And I thought, well, if it hasn't been done yet, we need to do it. That's what I was thinking. And, obviously, by 2017, it was water under the bridge. And I didn't know because I was new to the subject. So I started poking around. So I started poking around the DNA studies. And, that's when I found out what a horrific thing happened, back when this was all done. And people that I had been in touch with, thinking that they were legitimate people, all of a sudden I saw them in a different light because they had been on the wrong side of the argument on this. Mm-hmm. And for those listening to this, understand something. I I have nothing in this. I have no reason to back anybody other than, just looking at what they did and understanding how legitimate it is from a technical standpoint. Because my background is a technical field, and I can pretty easily see where something goes sideways or is not real. And I never, ever once had that indication with these efforts that were done back in the mid 2000s, first decade of the. So I got in touch with the people that did those studies. And, I've been following their work and trying to learn about it ever since. And I know nothing about genetics. My wife is a genetics scientist. So just by chance, I got lucky. And she can answer my questions and she can educate me, but I'm slow to learn on this stuff. And I've been in touch with Melba for years, and some of the others involved in this. And I highly, highly recommend it's unbiased, and it just talks about what happened, and it gives you a good idea of what really took place. And if anybody
Sorry, let me stop you there. You said I heard you say you highly recommend, and then I couldn't hear you. Can you just say that again?
Okay, yeah. For anybody out there who is doubting or doesn't know and is interested, but especially if you're a doubter, I highly recommend that you read Scott Carpenter's latest book on the whole DNA effort, and I think it's called Truth Denied. I read the book finally, and it gives you a good, concise historical record of what happened. And it is a very good historical record of the event. And I mean, to call it a historical record is a, it takes a lot to make a concise historical record. It takes a lot of research, a lot of verification, and there's no conjecture. It's all very factual and real. And I highly recommend anybody who's not knowledgeable about this subject, who's doubting it without really understanding it, to read the book, because it will certainly set the record straight, if nothing else. And but back to what I was trying to do with this whole thing with genetics. I wanted to know what the genetic work was telling me, because at that point I kind of had an idea of what the historical record was telling me, and I wanted to know what open mind. No, I could have two completely disparate ideas coming out of genetics and coming out of the historical record. I'm not trying to force fit anything here. I'm letting the evidence lead me, and that's what I always do. I let the evidence talk. I let it lead me where I'm going. And to my shock and surprise, what the DNA studies were leaning towards was exactly what I was concluding based on the historical record. And to be quite honest, for a long time I wasn't going to say anything to anybody. It's like you just don't. But it got to the point where as I knew more and more about the Nephilim, because it was a learning curve for me, as I knew more, as I found the Book of Giants again, which is something that I had looked at like, I don't know, a decade ago or so. And at that time, back around, actually it was around 2008, at that time, it was being called a hoax on the internet. And it was being called a hoax by a lot of legitimate players. And, it was being called a hoax by mainstream media, of course, but it was also being called a hoax by academia, specifically religious academia. And I didn't understand at that time that there's a reason for that, And so I just thought, okay, I'm not gonna believe this thing, because things on the internet are kind of crazy. But when I found the Dogman print, I went back to it, and that's when I discovered not only was it considered legitimate now, but it was being used for studies. So things changed over that decade a lot, and and the naysayers, the people who were trying to get ahead of it, they usually run out of steam, which is kind of what I see happening with the naysayers of the DNA effort. They're kind of running out of steam. I mean, Scott's book kind of puts it all to rest, so I would highly recommend reading that book. But yeah, I mean, now that I know kind of through the Book of Giants what took place, all of the experiments that occurred using animals and Nephilim genetics, and we're in there too, by the way. We're in the Nephilim, so we are in these animal animal Nephilim hybrids. Our genetics are going to be in there, and the record says it. We don't have all of the DNA work done yet, but it will be done. But it's the way this thing is coming together with me. It's all being confirmed, and it's all being verified, and I don't need to take it a whole heck of a lot further. I already have the record. I already have what was done in the scientific studies. At this point, they corroborate each other. Is there more genetic work to be done? Yes. But I think I know where it's going to go. To me, it's like, the answer's already there. It's a closed chapter for me almost. So that's kind of where I'm at, and I've been on a couple of, I get invited to groups. I started out with like 10 and I didn't expect it to ever get very big, and things have kind of gotten out of control. And I get invited to a lot of groups, and I don't know when to say no, so I just join them. And I've been getting kicked out of a lot of groups because of my position on the DNA and stuff. And all I can say to the people who have booted me out of their groups is, I'm sorry if I upset you, but I've done my verification, I've done my homework, and I'm not backing down from this position ever. I in a way, I consider it a closed chapter. I'm ready to move on to something else. So if people don't want to, if you have a historical record that's 2,000 years old or more, and you have current DNA work, and the two of them dovetail, what else do you need? One verifies the other. What else do you need? Really? There's your verification right there. And was there a dead Sasquatch involved in this? According to Scott's book, yeah, There was a dead Sasquatch involved in this study, and that in itself is highly controversial. But yeah, there was some actual flesh used. So if anybody's saying, well, hair, it wasn't just hair. And all of the tests that were done verified each other. And there were multiple tests done at several different labs. Some of them were blind tests. The labs got really upset when they found out what they were working with. And anybody in the scientific world will get upset if they get blindsided and figure out that they're working on this stuff without knowing it. And some institutions have gone ahead and done tests without the administration of the institution knowing about it. And when they wanted to get funding to further the studies, the institutions told them, this didn't happen, don't publish it, and stop whatever you're doing and go on something else. That's what the subject is like in the Vatican. And in the world of academia, the scientific world, governments of the world, and it all stems from the holder of the information of all of this hidden chapter and everything, which is the Vatican. It all starts with the Vatican and all leads back to the Vatican. They control it. They are the ones that started this whole thing. And they are the ones that they're going to have to dig themselves out from under it when it comes out. And it's coming out. So there's no stopping it at this point. And what I will say about the Vatican is they brought some people in over the last couple of decades to do translations of their retranslations of their ancient records they have there. And I can't say this is legitimate. I can't vouch for these guys. I can only see it developing, and it piques my interest, and I wonder, how this could be. And that is, these translators end up finding out that there were genetic operations here on this planet, and not just involving these hybrids, but possibly involving us as well. And these people were in the Vatican writing about this stuff, or translating this stuff, and they started writing about it outside of the Vatican. And although they were let go from their work with the Vatican, they were never told not to publish. And some of these people have published and continue to publish. And so there is yet more corroboration, and the Vatican has not shut it down. And the fact that the Vatican has not shut it down is huge, because they could easily quash it. But I think that the Vatican knows, people within the Vatican know, the people that matter. They know that it is time for the record to be, it's time for the record to get straightened out.
So do you think they'll try to ignore it for as long as they can, or how do you think they'll?
They have done that. They've been doing it for a long time. But I mean, we have, when you look at the whole thing, when you look at all of the UFOs that have, and if you want a number, if you want a number of confirmed cases of UFO sightings, it's in the millions. It's probably 2 to 3 or maybe even 4 million. But those are confirmed, and it's probably 5 to 10 times that what's actually happened. So, the Vatican knows that. They know this stuff. This is not news to them. They know who the watchers are. And it isn't just watchers that we see flitting around the skies. There are others here, and right in the Bible it says, be aware of enemies from the heavens. I mean, it's all, you'd be surprised what's in there.
Mm-hmm.
So the Vatican, I think, is in that transitional stage where they're kind of throwing up their hands, and it's gonna take its course. They aren't going to actively push it, but they aren't going to stop it either.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where it's at. It's in that transition stage right now.
What do you think about how the Navy, they were talking about the U.S. Navy, discussing UFOs in the news, Fox News and everything else?
Oh, yeah. My pet peeve. If it has anything to do with the U.S. government at all, when it comes to the subject of UFO, even if it's military or whatever, you are 99 points. 99 point. I'll just say I'll say 98%. You are being deceived. And I have years and years and years of watching the intelligence apparatus. And we have military intelligence, and we have civilian intelligence, and they both work on this. So you have organizations like the C_A working on it.
Mm-hmm.
And you have other agencies that are military in origin, and they have their own programs, or they work in unison, and they are constantly, every year, several times a year, muddying the waters on that subject. I saw all of this going on, and I was just like, okay, I'm not going to have anything to do with that. I'm not going to waste my time on it, because I'm working on this other stuff. And to me, I'm getting answers here, and I'm not going to get answers there.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get answers from the U.S. government. You just won't. Never have, never will. Since the end of World War II, since the intelligence apparatus came into being under Harry Truman, and, if anybody wants to understand that, Richard Dolan has done a lot of discussion on it. That was his area of study, historical study, in the university. So he's very knowledgeable about it. But, if you are hearing something from the government, whether it's the Navy and this organization that's what's it called?
MUFON?
No, it's To the Stars. To the Stars Academy, I think. TTSA, To the Stars Academy.
Oh, Tom DeLonge.
Tom DeLonge, but Tom DeLonge is just the face on it. You got to look underneath what's going on underneath that.
Mm-hmm.
And I know some of the people because over the years I've been in contact with them. One of them is Hal Putoff, and he's been around for a long time. I've been in touch with some of the people there and over the years, and I'm very cautious on that. And I don't put much, I try not to put too much credence until, it's when you know. And right now I don't know. So I'm being very cautious about what the U.S. Navy has been releasing. Yes, what they've been releasing is pretty amazing compared to what they used to let go. But I'm highly suspicious and very cautious that it means anything. So if anybody could shed light on it, because you still get the alien slant when you get anything out of the government, it's going to be, well, if anybody's going to really put some perspective on it, it's going to be the Vatican. And as far as I'm concerned, it's kind of their job. It's kind of their responsibility because they know what it's all about. They just do. So.
Yep.
So, when people start talking about UFO, Bigfoot, and they're, I mean, here's something that's a possibility, and I have no way to verify this. I have no way to know, other than if we were able to do more, if we were able to get one of these specimens and do DNA on it, there could be two completely different sets of creatures that look like Bigfoot on this planet that are genetically different, and some are being created and brought down here, from space operations or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the others were created here, 10, 20, 30,000 years ago.
Right.
We don't know. We don't know. It could be two completely separate sets of origins. It could be two completely different sets of characteristics that they have. My take on Bigfoot, generally speaking, and I wrote about this yesterday, I think. My take on Bigfoot is that they are, for the most part, they're pretty good. But they are a Nephilim hybrid, and we have to be careful. And not only do we have to be careful because they're a Nephilim hybrid, but we have to be careful because what if some of them are, this newer breed that we don't know anything about? We cannot put them on a pedestal. Until we understand them, until we fully understand who they are, where they came from, and what they are relative to us, we should treat this with caution. Till we understand it, till we fully understand it. That's really where we're at.
Right, and I think acknowledgement or acceptance is kind of relative to each person. Some people accept it for what it is, the studies and tests, and some people have a whole different perspective. And
yep.
So,
and the biblical record, and the looking at the biblical record as a historical narrative and leaving out the spiritual aspect entirely. It's kind of necessary if you want to look at it from a historical standpoint, and you just have to throw all of the spiritual stuff aside. You just have to, the way I approach this is you just have to treat it like a textbook, like a college study, like you're researching something, and just leave the side of it out that's going to cause debate and problems. Because you'll never get anywhere if you wallow in that. You just won't. And as for myself, I'm a Christian, so I don't, one of the toughest things for me was to make that split. It was very, very difficult for me to leave the spiritual side out of it entirely, and that's one of the reasons why it took me so long to really fully understand it from the historical standpoint, because I wrestled with it for a very long time. So, does that mean it doesn't change anything about how I view my relationship, my spiritual relationship. It does absolutely nothing. It doesn't shake my world. It does absolutely nothing to my religiosity at all. It just is, these are the facts. These are the things that happen whether we want to accept them or not. Nothing that we do or say is going to change what a Sasquatch is. All we can do is try and figure out who and what they are, and that's what I've been doing. And I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I have married, and I'm not the only one in this, others have done it too. And there's actually quite a few people out there that are kind of in this boat. When you marry the historical record to what we are finding out about them now, both through field studies and through the DNA studies, it all comes together. It's like corroboration, verification.
Mm-hmm.
So are there some odd things about them? Does this get into some odd stuff? I think if anybody, and at some point I'll be writing more about this. I will be doing some writing about the Book of Giants, so that it's out there. I've been trying to get people to just go research it on their own, but I think it's better if I just go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do that. I'm going to be writing about the Book of Giants, and I'm going to try really hard not to present anything out of context. I'm going to try to, if there are different viewpoints, I will be presenting those on different parts of it, and let the people decide. But I will be writing about that, the Book of Giants, and I will be writing about the angelic race, because I think one of the most misunderstood subjects is the angelic race. And I've learned quite a bit about them through this series of studies, and I think because they're involved in this, they need to be understood. And so I will be writing about the angelic race and trying to educate people. And my material that I get, it's all ancient biblical stuff. It's not New Testament stuff. It's not newer stuff. It's ancient Hebrew writings on who the angels were, what their capacities were, what kinds of things they were involved in, what their capabilities were. And some of them, I think I'm beginning to think that there are probably different classes or subclasses or whatever of angels, because some of them are, can just flip into an orb and float away, and some of them are more physical, and so even within the angelic race, you have variation. And so they're not all cookie cutter the same. I think they are different. And some of the stuff that we're seeing with Bigfoot, associated with Bigfoot, I think we need to understand some of it may be directly angelic presence. Mm-hmm. Some of it could be Bigfoot. Some of it could be something else coming here that also has those capacities. And I think right now it's not clear, but those are definitely possibilities. So, things we have to consider and explore. I don't have the answers, but what I do have in all of this is I have corroboration, I should say. Mm-hmm. And that corroboration is the ancient record with both the DNA work and what people are finding out in the field. Yeah. They all kind of come together. So, I will write about the angelic race, because I talk about it, but again, I can talk about the Book of Giants, and I can even send copies of it to people, but they're going to read it if I write it. They're not going to read it if I just send it to them. Yeah. And they'll have at least some context that they can springboard off of. I can give some context, and they might end up studying it and seeing it from an entirely different perspective and context. And, that's why I encourage people to look into it, because I'm not the authority on this. I'm not a scholar. I'm just chasing down an answer of where Dogman came from and where Bigfoot came from. And I think I have that. I think I have it close enough to where, for me, it's like, okay, that's done. so it's kind of like that.
Do you ever talk to some of your other colleagues from your UFO days about Bigfoot, or what do they think? If so.
Oh boy, that's a funny question. A lot of those guys, a lot of the guys that I worked with, let me talk a little bit about the beginnings of UFO research, because that's kind of important to this. Organizations that became really big and influential in the late 1950s and early 1960s, mostly the 50s, were started by people in the military who, by being in the military, had exposure to the subject because of the involvement of UFO in the military apparatus of the world, and it's prolific. The involvement of UFO in military activity is prolific. It's way more prolific than their involvement in civilian stuff. It's probably 2/3, 3/4 of it. And so they really had some exposure while they were in the military, and they wanted answers. So when they got out of the military, they started these organizations, and they had scientists, and these were serious organizations. They tried to get congressional hearings. This was a big deal, and they were serious about it. They were dead serious about it. And so when you realize that's how UFO research started, then you understand the seriousness it had, and that went on until the late 60s, when intelligence agencies started infiltrating these organizations and shutting them down. And about that time, that effort was culminating coming to a head. They also had Edward Condon do a report, supposedly an independent report, the University of Colorado, but he had jobs with intelligence over the years, so it was not independent at all. But Edward Condon did a study at the University of Colorado, and they essentially shut down UFO research from that point on, because all the people working on it were scientists, and they had this scientific inquiry, and the conclusion, which had nothing to do with all the evidence that was in the report, the summary and the conclusion is all people go to, and that was written by Edward Condon himself, and he wasn't even involved in the study, really. He just edited it, and he basically shut it down. He said there's nothing to it. There's nothing of scientific significance, no reason to continue to research this, and he shut it down. So this was like 1969, and so you have a little bit of background. It was the military people who started all of this research, and so when you start talking to these military types about Bigfoot and Sasquatch and Dogman. And these guys have been doing serious research, UFO research, all their lives. They're just going to laugh at you, and they're going to look at me like I just went off the deep end, and they probably, they have every right to think that. That's fine with me. I don't care. But it's not. It's not an environment that's at least the people I associated with, that's conducive to those kind of discussions. Now, having said that, a guy who I've known for a long time, since he wrote his first book, and we had conversations over the phone, Richard Dolan, He's got his own thing going now, and he's always interviewing people and stuff. And he was curious. I mean, he's kind of knowledgeable about Bigfoot. You know, he knows about the structures and all that stuff, and he's kind of knowledgeable about it.
Yeah.
And so he thought he would explore it a little bit. So he, being a scholar himself, he's a historian by degree. He did what anybody would do, and he contacted another scholar who happened to be, you know, connected with this subject.
Mm-hmm.
And he decided he was going to interview him because he thought, okay, this guy's like the mouthpiece, the scholarly mouthpiece for this subject.
Right.
And I just had, you know, I know Richard, and I watch his stuff, and, you know, we email back and forth about it, kind of the same way I email you and other people in the field about some of the things that are going on. So we do this, and he interviewed Jeff Meldrum. And when he interviewed Jeff Meldrum, I had just found out all of the things that had happened. You know, this was before I read Scott's book. This was probably a year ago or something like that. I don't remember.
Okay.
But I had found out some things that had gone on, and I wasn't too well. In the very beginning of this of my work in this field, he was one of the first people I contacted. One, we were born just less than 200 miles apart from each other, right around the same time. I don't think there's 6 months difference between us in age. And, you know, he was born in Spokane, Washington, and I was born in Eastern Washington too. So, and, you know, we're basically the same age. And so, you know, I was thinking, wow, this guy's pretty cool. I want to get a hold of this guy. And I was kind of shocked early on at the pushback I got from him, because I had verified a lot of the things out in the field that I'd seen in videos and stuff, and to me it was a no-brainer. And he was basically telling me, no, you don't know it, and it's not real, and don't talk to me about it. I don't want to hear about it. Well, so early on, I was already kind of like, what is that all about, you know? But I do know what he did with regard to the DNA efforts that took place. And that's a matter of record. Scott treated him with very carefully in his book, and I don't blame him, because, you know, you're writing a book, you don't want to stir it up too much. But anyway, the interview that Richard Dolan did with Meldrum, I could just see Richard kind of like disbelief would be the word I would use, because he had, just like you have, ideas how to lead the interview. And he was leading the interview, and one after another, the subjects that he brought up were shot down. And, you know, there was a very narrow scope that he would talk about, and outside of that, he basically shut it down. And he said there's nothing to it. There's nothing corroborating it. There's no, you know, we can't go there. So he basically shut the interview down. You asked if anybody, you know, in the UFO field had anything to do with the subject of Bigfoot. And that's the only instance that I can pass along. Now, having said that, having talked about the fact that Richard Dolan interviewed Jeff Meldrum as two scholars, and it kind of went south. I think from where I sit now, with what I know now, and it's all kind of come together in the last year or so for me. It's not like I've known this for a long time. From where I sit now, with what I know, what I've learned, and what I know is going to continue to happen, given the funding, and that, boy, that's always a problem, right? I think I'm in a position to bridge that gap. And I think the obvious person for me to approach will be Richard Dolan on this matter. And, either I'll meet him somewhere in between, or he'll go to New Mexico once I'm there, or I'll go to New York. I don't really want to go to New York, but I'll go to New York if I have to. He lives in New York, but he doesn't live in New York City. He lives upstate. But this is so. He and I really need to do some catching up, and I think the kinds of things that I have to say to him, along the lines of this subject, tie right into some of the other things that we've talked about over the years with respect to UFOs, watchers, and nuclear weapons, and all of that. So it is, in many ways, it's all tied together. I always said to the people within the UFO community, you cannot separate the subject of UFO from the Bible, for instance. And I don't know why I was so adamant about that. I really had no proof when I said it, but it was just kind of an instinctual thing that I said, we cannot dismiss biblical involvement in the subject of UFOs, and we have to pursue that. We have to explore it and either verify it or say it's not part of it. One or the other. We have to explore it. And, now that I've done all this work, I was right. I didn't know at the time. I had no idea.
Right.
But the more I learn, the more I read the biblical narrative, the more convinced I get. It doesn't go the other way. It never goes the other way. So, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think at least from the Bigfoot perspective, there's the people that have no connection to anything woo or supernatural, and then there's the other side that maybe make some relation to Bigfoot and UFOs or a little bit supernatural. And I haven't really been into the UFO community like I have been with Bigfoot, but at least I know it does exist, and I know people some groups, as you know, take a hard line if you even discuss that it could be something other than flesh and blood, whatever that means.
Yeah, I've been kicked out of a few of those.
Right. So you see how it goes, and I tried to explain my stance to you, in my group.
Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. If you can still hear me, can you hear me now?
Yeah, hang on,
okay.
Yeah, hang on 1 second, because I'm moving.
Okay.
What do you eat? So, are you there?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
But yeah, like I was saying, in my group on Facebook. Can you still hear me? Hello? Hello.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
I'm in my resting place now.
Okay.
It was nice knowing everybody. I'm on my way out. All right. I'm ready now.
Yeah.
So you were saying there's a lot of different camps and people don't necessarily agree on all these different aspects, and I totally get that. I mean, flesh and blood, woo, all that stuff. These are like. But here's the thing, okay? This is my approach. I don't know, but I'm not going to shut any doors.
Right.
I am going to, the way I approach anything that I'm looking at, I studied UFO for 25 years. That's, that I didn't have my mind made up. I let the evidence tell me where to go. And I let the history tell me what happened. And I tried not to put my own interpretation on things. I just let it come to me. That's how I research. I just let the information come to me. And when I think it's come and made its statement, then I'm done, Are you there?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So you got to be able to accept a lot of things when you start studying UFOs, and I did that. I just said, okay, I'm not going to have any ideas. I'm just going to let it come to me, and I'm going to accept whatever it is, and it's going to change. And that it did, I get ideas and I pursue them, and my ideas are off. So then I go and I look again and I look again and I look again until I stopped writing about it until I used to write about stuff before I really understood it. And I stopped doing that because, you're constantly apologizing for for writing something that was way off the mark. So I just quit doing that, and I just did deep studies for a very long time, and until it all kind of started coming together enough to where I felt like I could write about it and kind of be at least close to the mark.
Yeah, and I think a lot of your writings are.
So,
go ahead.
So. So all I can say to people who are in one camp or another is I don't think having an idea of how things are is a good way to learn about them. You have to let it all come together and be malleable and let it tell you where to go. You have to stay malleable. Your brain my brain can't handle this subject anyway. And so I can't decide one thing or another with it. I have to let the information tell me what to decide.
And isn't it funny how this topic, kind of delves in, if you really dive into it, how it leads you in all these deep paths, that really.
Oh man, you cannot believe how many rabbit holes I've been down.
and people, people that don't ever dive into it and just get little tidbits from the news and think it's a joke, they don't really understand why people get so far into it. So.
Because here's an observation. Here's something that I have something that I understand my place on this earth. I understand why I'm here. I understand why these others are here. I am very, very well grounded because I just let it all come to me. And some of it I think was kind of given to me. And I can't explain that. It's just, we don't know what happens. I've had too many coincidences, too many things happen that shouldn't have happened, that related to what I was doing, that solved things, like running into the Dogman prints, for crying out loud. I didn't need that. But that sort of clinched it for me. That made me go, that really is the thing that made me put the rest of this together.
Right.
And I don't even know what I was doing out that night. It had just been raining, you know. It was wet out, and it was cold, and I don't know why I even went out that night, but you know, it's you got to let it. There's always going to be different camps. There's always going to be different sectors that look at it differently, and not everybody not everybody has enough interest or enough drive to do some of the stupid things that I have done to try and resolve this, some parts of it, some aspects of it. And I don't know why I'm that way. You know, I just am. That's what I've become. And
yeah, I think,
you know, if I see a plant out in the forest and I've never seen it before here, I'm going to find out what it is, and you know.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I do the same thing.
You know, the one subject I won't touch, and we have a lot of them here, is mushrooms. I'm not going to go down that road. You know, some people learn how to find good mushrooms and stuff, and we have a lot of different kinds of mushrooms here. But man, all you have to do is make one mistake. You know,
right?
Bring them home and cook them, and that's your last meal. You know,
right?
So I'm a little bit careful. I consider myself a little bit careful, but I delve into stuff, and that's what I did with this subject.
Yeah, one of my friends who had a big group on Facebook, Donald Potts, he had Sergeant Major in Truth or Info group, and he actually got shut down and banned, but 30,000 members. But he always said, you know,
by who?
Facebook.
By who?
Facebook.
Okay, that tells me a lot.
Right, but we'll talk about that.
You know what?
But
okay.
One thing he always said is, you know, the people that don't want to dive into it, you can't make them look for the truth. But people that are hungry for the truth, you can't stop them from researching and looking. I always thought that was a good quote. But go ahead. It
is a good quote, and he knows exactly what he's talking about. There's just no, you know, you're either a seeker of information and truth, and whatever truth is, or you're willing to just settle for something and then defend it. And there's a difference between people who defend an idea and people who see the flaws, and maybe even at some point accept that idea, and then eventually over time see the flaws in it and move on.
Right.
So that's where I am. I have landed on so many squares thinking this is it, I'm here, and just to realize that it wasn't. But you know, now I let's see, it's 2020, and I started these studies around 1993, 94. And now it's like the missing piece for me that sort of brought it all together. All of the different things that I learned through the years. The thing that the missing piece was the Book of Giants. And the only reason I looked that up again was because of the Dogman print.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like once I understood what the Dogman was, where they came from, the rest of it, even though I didn't understand it all started just like, it's like when you finally get a hard piece in a jigsaw puzzle that sort of brings everything else together, and all of a sudden the thing is just going together like lightning.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened with me with the Book of Giants and the Dogman print. It was like the final click that brought everything together, and decades of work just all of a sudden fell into place.
Yeah.
It was the most bizarre thing I've ever experienced. And in my lifetime, I'll never see anything like that again. And I want to share it because I think it's important for people to understand that we're there. People are still thinking that we need to do more DNA because that last DNA round didn't pan out. It did pan out. We are there. And all of the evidence that this is something I really want to tell the community over and over and over and over and over again. The community has done a stellar job of putting a case together for the existence of this family of people that we're studying. They have done a stellar job. If we could put all of the information that people have collected in one place, we could and archive it. We could study structures. We could study glyphs. We could study language. We could study all these different things. And it would be, the data that we have collected since since it started to get put up on the internet, it's just incredible. But the problem is that people think that they're just contributing little bits and pieces. But they aren't. They're contributing much more than that. The word I'm looking for is when you get a bunch of things going together, and then all of a sudden it just gets bigger and bigger than the sum of the parts.
Right.
I can't remember what I'm not coming up with it, but
yeah, I'm not sure either.
It's huge. Yeah, it's just, we're there. I think if you could just access all of that information and you were talking about how you mapped out all the areas in Pennsylvania. Mm. Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah. Yes.
You just went back and looked at all the data and you found multiple sightings from different times in the same location and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. That's all we need. We just need studies. We just need people to look at the data and put some conclusions to it.
Yeah.
They might not be correct, 100% correct, but they're going to be in the ballpark, and
it's all about the presentation, like putting it in a concise, visible, or easily digestible way. And it's hard. It's not easy, it's kind of difficult.
No, it's not. Yeah. None of this is easy, but you get people that are interested in doing analysis, analyzing the information that's there. If you make it easy for them, they'll come and do it. That's kind of my thing. Mm-hmm. And I've never had it easy that way as far as hunting down all of this disparate information that's all over the place. Some of it's online, some of it's in books that aren't available anymore. Some of it's, some of it is in government records. You got to go in and, hopefully somebody else did the FOIA requests and you can get it from them, because I hate doing that kind of stuff.
Right.
I hate doing FOIA requests because I don't have patience to wait for those bozos to come around and put it together. And the archives are all over the United States, and so you might be in the wrong archive. And so, and then, if after 2 years of looking for a document, you find out you went to the wrong archive. And they send you this other archive, and 2 more years later, you find out, okay, yeah, I think we found it. But some of it is classified, and we can't give it to you. You know, this is how it goes. So,
and even if you get so far and you put it all together, you know, and there it is, the case is made, and you know, you still have half the people that just think you're an idiot, and it's not even has no relevance. So it's kind of like,
well, George, I have nothing to say because in the end, those people are not, you know, they're not contributing. They aren't necessarily in the way, but they aren't contributing. And so, just like the government and UFO answers, I just go around them. I just won't spend any time on it.
Right.
I mean, I'm real quick to dismiss stuff and just forget it ever happened. And
you're right.
You know, one of the things that I give Richard Dolan a bad time about is if you want to learn about UFO, you have to study UFO. If you want to learn about what the government did over the last 50 years, you study what the government did over the last, 50, 70 years, whatever. And a lot of UFO researchers end up researching the government's response to UFOs and not the UFOs themselves. And, if you want to understand the behavior of UFOs, you've got to study what the UFOs have done. And if you want to understand how that behavior relates to us, you have to study the history to see if there's any relationship there. Our history and what the UFO were doing, and what we were doing at the time that happened, and was it a cause effect kind of thing? Were they responding to some stimulus that we gave them, like we just created a new more dangerous, like a MIRV warhead or something like that, and they were being installed, and all of a sudden, where they were being installed, there was a lot of interferential. And what I mean by that is they got them directly involved, interferential UFO activity.
Right, and you wrote about that in your papers that you sent me.
Yeah. I mean, I learned a lot. And I can't even talk to guys in the UFO field about this. It's so hard for them to grasp, but you can't. History doesn't lie. It's there. The information is there. I just can't get others to see it,
right,
to go after it. I'm going to write the summary. It's going to be it's probably going to be, I don't know, it could be 50 pages long. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to write the summary, and it's going to be archived on the internet, and that's going to be the end of my involvement in it. They have what I could not provide the detailed evidence that I wanted to. It would take a group of 20, probably 10 years,
right, to
do it. 10 years of eating sandwiches for dinner and drinking coffee and working all night, that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
And having 20 people dedicated to it, and that's never going to happen. So the task it's just to do it, and then to do it and not get shut down by one of the intelligence apparatus would be.
Mm.
They got wind you were doing it, boy, they would just shut it right down, and they wouldn't hesitate to send threats your way.
So
that's the kind of stuff I want to avoid.
Right. So is there any place, if people hear this, that they can read some of the things you wrote? Do you want to direct people anywhere? You still there?
Yeah, I'm here. You're talking about telling Bigfoot people where to go to learn some serious aspects of UFO research.
Or, wherever you want to directly?
The only group that I was ever affiliated with was a group that originally was formed in the mid-1950s. It had very high-level military and scientific personnel working for it. It was shut down in the late 60s, it was infiltrated in the late 60s and shut down in the early 70s. It was resurrected by one of the older members and a founding member sometime in the 1990s. I became affiliated with this group when I started doing my serious military-related UFO research, because they had a lot of good data on their newly resurrected website and stuff I couldn't get a hold of anywhere else, and it was very convenient. So I started contacting these people and working with them, and eventually the founding member of that group, who was with that group since the late 1950s, recommended that they put together an effort to look at the nuclear aspect of UFO activity. And I was a founding member of that group. I think not to put myself on a pedestal or anything, but I think the reason that they created that group, that project in the first place, was because I was onto it and they knew it. And that group is called NICAP, NICAP, and it's at nicap.org.org. And when you go to their front page, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff you can find in there, but when you go to the front page, there's a nuclear connection project or nuclear portion of it, down towards the bottom of the page. And you go there and there's a section there's a menu that's sort of a funky menu that has members and all this other stuff in it. And there's one that has papers that were done on the subject. And you can go to that papers section, and my papers are in there.
Okay.
And my name, they've got my name on them, so people can find them there, and we can supply some links to that.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to put your name on the interview?
On this interview?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. This is not. I'm not dealing with the subject I was involved with before. This is definitely okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to worry about that anymore. Not until I write the summary.
Okay.
And I'm not going to do that until I'm in a different location.
And those articles that I wrote, they have your picture on the top. Is it okay if I use it in a screen?
Absolutely. I don't look like that anymore.
I think you look good. I never knew what you looked like till I saw that picture, and that's not what I imagined you looked like.
Well, that was like that was probably in the 90s, in the mid to late 90s, and that was, and in that picture, I only cropped my head out of it, but in that picture, I'm sitting on a beach on North Kauai in the Hawaiian Islands, and facing the Pacific Ocean. So I was pretty happy, you know.
Yeah, you look like you're having a good time. Got your shades on. Yeah.
Yeah. You
cool.
got to have those there, or your eyes will get fried.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, that's. I don't look like that anymore, man. I'm decrepit and falling apart, and you know, I got chunks of my face that are sitting on my kneecap, and you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're the only one that knows that, so that's fine. You know.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, on my page, you can see what I look like now. There's pictures of me out farting around in the woods that my wife took. Yeah, there's a few. You know, you see this old codger in pants that are too big that are falling off the hips, and
like I don't know if your page is public. I haven't looked at it. The pictures and stuff. If I look at your page and see pictures that I like, that stuff we talked about, can I use those? And
absolutely.
Okay. Is that
the way I, just so that you know, George, that Facebook page, it's for everybody. It's anything that's on there is, I want people to, I want that information to be shared.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll put a link to that then. You know, it's a good resource to find what you write and other things, and we have a lot of your writings in my group as well. You know, I always thought.
Well, you know, you made a point. You said you approached me and said we'd, you know, like to archive your stuff, and I mean, to me that's like, I never thought about that before until you brought it up, and I was like really impressed that you even thought about that. And you know, to me it was like, you know, I felt honored that you would even kind of approach me about that, and I still feel that way. And you know, when I share stuff, people really get bent out of shape. You know, they invite me into their group, and you know, lately I've been telling them, unless you know what you know, who I am and what I do, don't invite me. You know, because I will be, you know, sharing inflammatory things that people consider inflammatory on your group pages, and if you don't like it and you kick me out, that just reflects on you because you didn't do your homework. You know,
right?
So
yeah,
you know, I mean,
I like your articles. You know, they're like posts, but they're really like articles, you know, each one of them. So that's why I thought, wow, this guy really, he sees the big picture and knows what he's talking about and everything. That's why I thought they were very important to save, you know, so we don't have to go looking for them. You know?
I'm writing now because I'm writing about it now, George. I'm writing about it now because I know I'm over the target.
Mm-hmm.
Before I wasn't writing the articles, I don't know if you noticed this, but all of my stuff before was all field stuff.
Right, right.
But as this thing came together, and you can kind of see when I started writing the articles, as it came together and I felt like I was actually there, that's when I started writing about it.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of see how it evolved by looking at my articles, but it wasn't until I felt like I really was there that I started writing about it. I have had too many false starts in my 25 years of doing this. I've had too many false starts, and I was just giving myself the space and being patient with myself to allow the ideas to gel, to allow the information to reveal itself to me without forcing anything, without pushing an idea and then trying to prove it by finding evidence to support it. That's backwards. You really need to not have an idea, and when it all comes together, you'll know it. You'll just know it. Mm-hmm. You'll know you're there. And that's kind of what I did. I quit pushing it. I quit pushing my own ideas on it. And I mean, that's not easy to do. And I don't fault individuals out there who defend an idea even though they think they're sure, but I don't fault people for taking that position. it's a natural human thing to do. It's harder to push yourself away from that, and it's not easy. You age quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. Well, it's I think I'm starting to lose my batteries here. I'm running out of batteries. So I don't want to lose.
Well, I'm starting to lose my mind. So.
That's why we got to get this stuff down now. Before, hey,
before you hear about this homeless guy named Rob Duvall walking around in Albuquerque, New Mexico, begging for cigarette butts.
That's right. I mean, my wife, she gets frustrated with me because I'm telling you, I got Lyme disease and I just can't remember stuff anymore. Like I forget stuff so much, and I know I'm forgetting, and it's like my short-term memory is just destroyed. But
there's not much you can do about that either, is there?
Yeah, I could just try to do new tricks and write things down, and I don't know. But
Lyme disease is not curable, is it?
Well, you could come back from it. I've been through all these stages of it, and I can tell when I get worse. Like I can't think right. So I just try to do as much as I can every day, and that's it.
Was that tick-borne?
Yeah. I've been bit like 10 times. Over each year.
Wow.
So.
Wow. That's rough.
It's strange, but. I don't know. I'm not too worried about it. I'll just do what I can,
Yeah.
That's it. But yeah, I mean, it was great talking to you tonight. I'm glad we did this,
Yeah, thanks for the invite. I never would have. I would never have offered to do this.
Hey, like just 2 years ago or last year, whatever, I never did any interviews, and this one guy, Tommy Cooper from Cryptovania, he kept asking me, he kept calling me. I was like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And then since I did that one, now I just started making my own channel and making videos and stuff. I don't really talk that well, so I just try to stick to the evidence and let other people talk, So.
Well, you are a good interviewer. I mean, the line of thinking that you took this through, I thought was really well. It was really well done, and I'm glad I just told you lead it, because I'm terrible. I could have taken it all over the place, but
I used your.
I made the points that I wanted to make.
Yeah. And I was looking at your points and making sure we covered most of them. So.
Well, there's some of that stuff that if people want to know it, they can read it on either your website or mine or whatever. I don't care where they read it as long as they read it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not forcing people to read my stuff, but I put it out there for others to learn. I don't feel like I have to tell the world about this, but if there are people interested, I would hope they looked at my material and thought about it, because a lot went into that, and I wouldn't have written it if I didn't think I was there. I just would have left it alone. So.
Yeah, and I think that's why I think it's important, to have people read what you say, because you have put in so much time and so many years, and all these pieces are, starting to click for you. And I think that makes sense. So hopefully.
Well, I'm glad you do, because it just could be that I'm getting old and you have Lyme disease. we only make sense to each other then. I'm
sure people they might come to that conclusion. You never know.
No, George, I think you're an excellent interviewer, and I can't believe you're one of the only people out there who really does keep things neutral. And you know, that is, other people say it, you walk the walk. I mean, I'm in too many groups. I'm just so that you know, I'm gonna probably migrate everything to a new Facebook page eventually here.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping to just dump a lot of stuff when I do that and kind of start fresh, because I don't know, I didn't know what I was getting into with all these other groups and stuff. And
yeah,
now I have an idea, and I'll be a lot more careful, a lot more selective. So
yeah, it's trial and error. It's such a strange world with this Facebook and groups, and you know, I'm in 300 groups, you know, but what does that mean? You know, at the end of the day, I'm just myself, and I have my own channel, and who cares? Like, you know, so.
Yeah, I don't even know how many I'm in. I don't even count. I mean, every time I see an invitation, I'm like, oh, crap, you know.
Right.
Because I don't want to spend the time figuring out who's in there, and I don't really know, and I don't pay much attention to who's who and who's what, and until I get kicked out of groups, and then I put their name on a list. You know, that's the only way I learn is because I'm really so focused on the information that I'm not paying much attention to the community at all.
Yeah,
zero. You know, I'm focused on the people that are moving studies forward that matter, like language and glyph interpretation. And you know, to me, the biggest thing we can do is learn. If we could learn their language, then we could make some headway. You know, and you know, and I know some people that are working on that, but they're not ready to be public about it yet. So, you know, that makes it hard. I've been pushing on them a little bit, but you know, they're like me. They're Scandinavian. They're pretty stubborn, and they don't take too kindly to being pushed around, and I'm not really willing to push them around anyway. So, you know, it's all right.
And another thing too, I was going to tell you, we don't have to go into it, but you know, from my perspective, a lot of this topic, you know, we could go high level and deep, you know, into the history and all that. But, you know, on a surface level and social media and stuff, a lot of it's regional. Like, people kind of only care maybe about their state or their county. You know, they might not even care about the world and global and different continents and theories. You know, they might just care about sightings that are down the road from their house.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. And you know what? Those people are contributing more than they realize. They might just go out to the woods twice a year, but they discover something and they provide the documentation for it on the internet, and it becomes a gem, you know. And that's the way I see it. I mean, we don't need academia. We don't need the scientific community. We're already there. It's already been done.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's accepting it, but you know what? That's not Melba's problem. That's not the team's problem. That's not David. How do you say his name? Polides?
Mm-hmm.
That's not his problem either. I mean, you know, and he doesn't make it his problem. He's like, okay, we did that.
Yeah.
And he moved on.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, that's where I'm at with it. We have it. We don't need to kill one. We don't even need to walk up to one and yank a bunch of his hair out and then run for our life. We've got it. We don't need to do it.
Right.
You know, it's done.
I feel the same.
And I've had plenty of interaction with them. I know what they're like. And I've had some bad situations come up, and I never let those go. I always tell them, you can't do that. You know, and you know, evidently it worked, because I have not had those kind of problems since, and that was when I first got started, and it pissed me off. So, it's kind of like, hey, I respect you guys. I don't come in your area and throw things around and yell, and I'm trying to be neutral here, and you guys are not helping this situation. So I don't fear them. I don't see a reason to fear them. I know who they are. I know what they are. I know we're related. And I tell them, we're related, whether you like it or not. So, don't treat me bad here. So.
And that's another reason why I like this topic versus a little bit more than UFOs and other topics, because you could just go outside down the street and have things happen if you have to look for.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
So.
But let me tell you something. You can do that with UFO, too. But when you don't know what you're getting into with UFO. It could be watchers, or it could be somebody else, and
right.
And I'm not really willing to take that chance.
Right. When it gets into spiritual level and stuff like that, it's like, okay, that's.
Well, it can get into major deceptions, and you're thinking one thing, and you're thinking that they're all good and great and all this stuff. Meanwhile, they're coming at night and taking you out of your house, and and stealing from you basically without your consent. And if there's one thing I'm really gets my hair up, it's anybody that crosses my personal sovereignty, and I feel so. That's why I don't have a problem with the Sasquatch, because I won't let anybody cross that line with me. I don't care if they're 20 feet tall,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to take a gun to them, but I'm sure as hell going to let them know what I think.
Yep. And that usually works.
I mean, it's God-given, What we have is God-given, and they can't take it away, period. So I know that. I don't have to wonder. I know that. So all my studies have taught me where I sit in this world, and that's, if nothing else, that's a good place to be.
That's right.
So, all right, George, I'm going to let you go. I'm going to eat some dinner.
Yeah, sorry we went so long, but I think it was worth it.
Oh, I totally enjoyed this. I was freaking out about it all day. But you asked me how my day went. I was like, well, there was a storm outside, but there's also a storm in my head. So.
Yeah.
I was freaking out about it.
Well, I'm glad you decided to go through it, the interview, and I had a good time, and I'm sure we'll talk more. I'll probably ask you where some pictures are, or I'll look through your page and things.
Yeah. Just send me some messages, and I'll see what I can dig up for you.
Okay.
I will help you with that, George.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Rob. And you have a good night. Enjoy your dinner.
All right. Thanks, George.
Okay.
Take care now.